meditation. So, Venerable Analayo gave four different talks about mindfully facing climate change. And this was about 4 years ago, in 2019. And he modeled his talks on the Four Noble Truths. So the first talk that he gives is about relating to the earth. And the second talk, the one that I'm mostly going to share tonight, is about ethics of the mind. And it's looking at the second noble truth, which is the truth the Buddha revealed, that all of our problems, all of our dukkha, all of our suffering, all of our stress, all of our distress, all of our disease is from craving.
What's craving?
And craving is misguided desires, wanting. Yeah, that we want this, we want it different than that, we don't want this, we want. And we come into the world and you watch young children, they want a lot, they want it right now. And you can see all that's just such a strong driving force in the human mind. And unless we come in contact with wisdom teachings, we don't stop and realize that we think that we're not satisfied because we're not getting what we want, but we're not satisfied because of our wanting.
Mm-hmm.
Our wanting is the problem. And in this framework, you can come to see the root causes of the climate catastrophe that's unfolding before us and that we're all a part of. And to do this, Venerable Analayo drew primarily from one sutta. It's an amazing sutta in the long discourses of the Buddha, the Digha Nikaya. It's sutta number 26, and it's about a world-turning monarch. And it's a parable. This sutta is basically a parable. In the beginning of the sutta, the Buddha gives two teachings. He starts with the very first thing that he says, I'll quote. How does one dwell as an island unto oneself, as a refuge unto oneself, with no other refuge, with the Dharma as one's island, with the Dharma as one's refuge, with no other refuge? In this teaching, the Buddha is telling his disciples, he's telling his followers, that you need to you need to find refuge inside of yourself. And you need to have the Dharma, my teachings, the Buddha's teachings, as your refuge, as your place of solidity, security, and safety. And he goes on to say how to do that. Quoting again from the same sutta, and this is the very beginning of the sutta. Here, one abides contemplating the body. Here, one abides contemplating feeling tones. Feeling tones is this affective quality of every single experience. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant, just neutral. So one abides contemplating the body, one abides contemplating this feeling tone of each experience, one abides contemplating mental states, and one abides contemplating Dhamma, contemplating Dharma. Diligently, clearly knowing and mindful, free from greedy desire and sadness in the world. So these are the instructions to find refuge within ourselves. And the way that we do this is a practice that the Buddha explains many times. It's called the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 sort of establishments of mindfulness, the 4 things that we need to be mindful of. And it's the body, it's this feeling affect of each experience, it's the mind state, and then it's Dhamma, it's the Buddhist teachings and how our mind states are relating to the Buddhist teachings. These 4 establishments, foundations of mindfulness. And other places in the suttas where he gives these instructions, he gives them a few times. There's be a refuge inside of yourself, find refuge inside of yourself, and practice these 4 ways of being mindful, these 4 anchors for your mindfulness. Always in response to dealing with grief, dealing with loss. Often the loss of a loved one or the imminent loss of a loved one. And the Buddha begins this parable that he tells to his followers with these instructions. So right away, I'll get into the parable, and I think it might blow your minds that the Buddha gave this parable. But right away, we're drawing from the Buddha's teachings. The tool for dealing with grief is mindfulness. So when we get into the parable, what it is the Buddha tells of this long string of very righteous kings, very righteous rulers that following wisdom teachings and surrounding themselves with wise advisors. And they ruled righteously, and they ruled for a long time. And the members of the kingdom, the population was prospering. And then came a king who did surround himself with wise advisors, but he didn't pay attention to what they were advising. And he just started to rule according to his own ideas. And things started to not be as prosperous and not be as good. And we're going to pick up the parable there, but we're going to jump in with this king who was ruling according to his own ideas. The king did not give property to the needy, and as a result, poverty became rife. With the spread of poverty, a man took what was not given, which is called theft. They arrested him and brought him before the king. This is the beginning of things not being prosperous, and then the beginning of things becoming more unethical, not fully ethical. So they bring this thief before the king. And the king said to him, "Is it true that you took what was not given, which is called theft?" "It is true, your majesty." "Why did you do that?" "Your majesty, I have nothing to live on." So you can see that the poverty was the impetus for immoral behavior. And the king's heart moves. He's not, a terrible person, but he's not very wise. So what happens next is the king gave the man some wealth, saying, "With this, my good man, you can keep yourself, support your mother and father, your partner and children." So the king had been negligent. He hadn't been taking care of the needy, and he realizes, and so compassion arises. However, it's quite a misguided strategy. So what happens next is, then people heard that the king was giving away wealth to those who took what was not given. And they thought, suppose we were to do likewise. The king was, the authorities were rewarding this theft. So this is compassion without wisdom. And what do you think happened? Immoral behavior increased. It was like, it was being met with a reward. So theft increases. And more people are being arrested and brought before the king. So then, quote, the king thought, if I give wealth to everyone who takes what is not given, this theft will increase more and more. I had better make an end of this person, finish him off once for all, and cut his head off. So the king completely changes his strategy, changes tactics. So, hearing about this, people thought, now let us get sharp swords made for us, and then we can take from anybody what's not given. We'll make an end of them, finish them off once for all, and cut off their heads. So you just see that, the whole parable is just basically this moral decline of more and more and more unethical behavior. And it's not as clear in the Digha Nikaya, in the Pali scriptures, but in the parallels in the Chinese agamas, which are the parallel suttas, they're preserved in Chinese. We have them preserved in Pali. And now we have scholars like Venerable Analayo who can read both in the original language. And in the Chinese versions, it's more clear that it was the owners of possessions that were being the ones that would often catch the thief and bring them before the king. And so that's why the thieves were getting swords and realizing, well, if I get caught, I'll just kill the owner. That way I'm not brought before the king. So this is how things are just escalating downhill, downhill, downhill. So the Buddha goes on in this parable. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, which was what the king did, poverty became rife. From the growth of poverty, and I just want you to think about the parallels for our world. From the growth of parallel, the taking of what was not given increased. From the increase of theft, the use of weapons increased. From the increased use of weapons, the taking of life increased. And from the increase in the taking of life, people's lifespans decrease. So there's an acceleration, just increased descent into immorality. And what's interesting is in the parable, the Buddha makes it clear that as people became more and more aggressive and violent and unethical, you also start to see a degradation of the environment. There's also an ecological mirroring of this descent into chaos. The Buddha goes on to say, these flavors will disappear as things become more and more immoral. Ghee, butter, sesame oil, honey, molasses, and salt. Among them, kodo millet will be the chief food, just as rice and curry are today. And this is quite a short passage. There's more detail in the parallel passages in the Chinese. But you see, these flavors will disappear. Ghee and butter, this is dairy, honey will become compromised, and we've seen that with the bees, molasses, sugarcane. And what becomes the chief food as things get more and more unethical and chaotic is kodo millet. Kodo millet is it's just a wild, grass. It grows, in really marginal soil, low nutrient soil. It doesn't take an irrigation system. Takes very little water, unlike rice, which is much more water needed to grow rice. And it's drought tolerant. And this becomes the chief food. And the seeds of kodo millet are considered, they're really low grade, and very inferior food in India. So as things are declining societally and as things are declining ecologically, it gets worse. The Buddha goes on. Among them, fierce enmity will prevail, one for another, fierce hatred, fierce anger, and thoughts of killing, mother against child, and child against mother, father against child, and child against father, just as a hunter feels hatred for the animal he stalks. So now we've come to really a total breakdown. You think of the Buddha telling this parable in ancient India. The family was the central building block of society, and now the Buddha is describing that it'll be within families, parent against child, child against parent. So it gets very dire. However, in the parable, the Buddha then says this, shares this. There will be some human beings who will think, let us not kill or be killed by anyone. Let us make for some grassy thickets or jungle recesses or clumps of trees, for rivers hard to ford or inaccessible mountains, and live on roots and fruits in the forest. So there's a small group of people that realize, this is ridiculous. This is terrible. And let's not just go down the tubes with everybody. Let's do something different. Let's first of all save ourselves and make a pact among ourselves that we won't kill each other, we won't eat each other. And this is the turning point. Things have just declined. And then you have this small group of people, and what it is that they decide is that we won't kill each other. We'll not be savage. That'll be the thing that we can. I'll trust you, won't kill me. You can trust me, I won't kill you. And just with that alone, everything starts to rise back up. There's tremendous devastation and mass deaths, but this small group of people, they survive, they live, and the whole thing turns around because then they realize, wow, now we're still alive. There's tremendous grief and carnage for them to face and to deal with, but they realize, because we're basically the first precept of the Buddhist 5 precepts, to not take the life of another living being intentionally. They have that one precept that they keep, and it changes everything. And so then it just, the Buddha goes on and describes that when kings are unrighteous, the people of the towns and countryside become unrighteous. the winds blow off course, and at random, sufficient rain does not fall. When sufficient rain does not fall, the crops ripen irregularly. When people eat crops that ripen irregularly, they become short-lived. So the Buddha is definitely explaining that if we start to be more and more and more unethical, that there'll be environmental repercussions. And so this is I think this is the contribution that Buddhism can make to what we're all facing with climate change, is to understand the real problem. The real problem is the problem of ethics, and the solution is an ethical solution. And but to get a little bit deeper and more specific, this whole idea of ethics, when you take, all of the suttas, working together, you realize the ethics is actually the ethics of the mind. That the root cause of the ecological degradation and chaos that we're living in is because it's rooted in unethical behavior, and that unethical behavior is coming from inside of the human mind. This is what the Buddha is teaching us. So in the middle length discourses, in Sutta 78, just to go in this direction, the Buddha says, what are unwholesome types of conduct, unethical types of conduct? They're unwholesome bodily actions, unwholesome verbal actions, and wrong livelihood. These are called unethical, unwholesome types of conduct. And he goes on and says, and where do these unwholesome types of conduct originate from? Their origin is stated. They should be said to originate from the mind. What mind? Though mind is multiple, varied, and of different modalities, there is mind affected by lust, by hate, and by delusion. Unwholesome types of conduct originate from this. So this is what in the early Buddhist texts are called the three poisons. These are the three unwholesome roots. These are the three aspects of each of our minds that cause all of our problems. Their lust, greed, their hate, aversion, and their delusion, ignorance. These three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. And so what the Buddha's teachings can give to us is that we can not be perplexed and like, how is this happening? It's because of these three things: because of greed, it's because of hatred, and it's because of delusion. And we start to realize that this is a human problem, and we're also part of the problem. That these three roots are in each of our minds. And so we can stop. There's an invitation that's possible to stop thinking about like us and them, and these evil CEOs and these terrible stockholders in the fossil fuel industry, and just start to realize this is greed, this is hatred, this is delusion. It's living in me, it's living in them. Obviously, it's living in them to a much greater degree. They can just start to become, archetypes to us, archetype of greed. This is what happens when someone is just terribly, terribly delusional and misguided, and is making horribly irresponsible choices that are shortening the life, perhaps, of all of humanity. But it's not a mystery, and we're not victims. And we can start to see that, as I need to clean up my own toxic waste site, I need to clean up all the poisons in myself. And as I'm doing that, there's a ripple out effect to my children, my partner, my neighbors, my co-workers. So we can take up the practice of trying to train our own minds, which is what we're already all doing. That's why we're coming here on a Tuesday night. But it's also for the environment. It's all connected. So it's a shared problem. So how do we do this? The Buddha gives us teachings. It's these 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in particular, the 3rd foundation of mindfulness is looking at our own mind, looking at our own mental states. The Buddha instructs, one knows a mental state with greed to be a mental state with greed. Or one knows a mental state without greed to be a mental state without greed. Or one knows a mental state with anger to be a mental state with anger. Or one knows a mental state without anger to be a mental state without anger. Or one knows a mental state with delusion to be a mental state with delusion. Or one knows a mental state without delusion to be a mental state without delusion. It's where our mindfulness in our meditation practice, and then even throughout the day, it's like a witness, it's like a monitor, it's with us. And what's going on in the mind? And sometimes you'll realize even, as you start to become more and more mindful. I remember early on, I've been meditating about a year, and my partner said something, and it all happened so fast, the anger. And I realized that my lips get really tight when I get angry, it would just, and it's probably been done that my whole life, but I'd never noticed, oh, there's these things that happen even to my face as anger is there. Just growing in our mindfulness, what's going on in the mind. And the sutta where the Buddha is teaching this teaching the most specifically and thoroughly is in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses. The sutta number 10 is called the Satipatthana Sutta, which is actually the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And the instructions for each of the foundations of mindfulness says, and this is particularly for the 3rd foundation, the mental state. In this way, in regard to mental states, one abides contemplating mental states internally. What's going on inside my own mind? But then the Buddha goes on. Or in regard to mental states, one abides contemplating mental states externally. You start to realize, oh, that person is acting out of anger. Well, you're pretty sure. Or out of greed. Or in regard to mental states, one abides contemplating mental states internally and externally. And you'll notice this development in your practice. You start to, when we're learning how to be mindful, it all is here. You have to spend a lot of your energy here. And then we've had a habit our whole life, when we go to interact with someone, then our energy goes out. And it goes there. And then eventually, after you've practiced for a while, you get to where your energy is your attention and your mindfulness is partly here and partly there. and you're aware of what's going on internally and externally, both at the same time. This is a tremendous stage in practice, because then, it's this middle way, right? It's not just in, and then you get pulled out and you lose the plot. And then you're not just out. Eventually you get to where you can have both going on, internally and externally. And specifically in terms of climate change, Venerable Analayo goes on in his talk to give, using these three things that are the root cause of the problem: greed, hatred, and delusion. Venerable Analayo gives his own analysis of how these can interact with our dealing, with our facing of climate change. And I found that very useful. And his framework is, he feels like when greed is really operating, the response to climate change can have a lot of a flavor of denial. That we're just not wanting to, there's a greed there of just wanting to act like it's not happening, or there's even a personal greed of just not wanting to think long and hard about the implications and make some lifestyle changes. We want to keep flying where we want to keep flying, and we want to keep eating what we want to keep eating, and we want to keep, cooling things and heating things to, so that it's that perfect temperature that we're, so comfortable, far be it for us to put on a sweater, so that's how greed can manifest. And the other one with hatred is kind of obvious, that there can be a lot of anger. And we can have a lot of anger. I know for me, my anger comes up the most when I listen to or read things from like the 80s, 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Just this feeling of like, there was so much known then and so little done. But this is aversion. And sometimes we can feel like it's justified, that it's a righteous anger. But if you listen to any really wise teacher, the Buddha, Gandhi, nothing good comes from anger, ever. It's never justified. It always will cause some kind of distortion and something that's off balance. So we definitely have to deal with our own anger, and move through it, and our own grief, and move through it. And that's a stage, you stop denying and let yourself feel what you need to feel, and care for it, and realize that it's not your best self, it's not your best contribution. It's totally understandable, especially when we have children, when we have grandchildren. And then Venerable Analayo feels like our delusion, greed and hatred are delusion. They're expressions of delusion. It's all delusion. But there's, a branch of delusion that doesn't fit into greed, it doesn't fit into hatred. So that's like pure delusion. There's probably nothing pure about delusion, but it's solely, mainly the flavor of delusion. And our delusion can manifest as and this is Venerable Analayo's take, but I think there's value in it. Can manifest as resignation, like, oh, I'm just one person, you know, what can I do? And this is delusion, you know, because there's karma, because what we do actually matters, and we all need to try and do the right thing as much as possible. I mean, if everybody just was like, oh, well, I'm just one person, I mean, sort of what the some of the situation that we're in. But we want to be doing the right thing and making certain changes in our own life and in our own hearts because it's the right thing to do. And then we have a clear conscience, we have coherency within ourselves, and we're not doing it necessarily so that it solves the problem. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. So I'll also just want to share one last thing, and that is in 2011, Thich Nhat Hanh came to Vancouver and did an amazing retreat. Were you there?
No, I was supposed to go though, but I remember it. I know I was gonna go with my kids, but something fell through. Yeah,
Yeah.
you went.
No, crazy. So, what was I thinking? I live in Vancouver. Oh, anyway. Oh. But he was interviewed with David Suzuki, and there's a clip that I think is worth watching. If you go Thich Nhat Hanh, David Suzuki on YouTube, you get it. It's called Despair. It's just 5 minutes, and there's the moderator. I'm not even going to tell you. I found it very nourishing and uplifting, and a model for mindfully facing climate change in a way that is not overwhelming. We need to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed, and make sure that we're not just in complete denial and resignation. This is a lot for us to work through, and it's work for our generation to do. Yeah, and the Buddhist teaching totally speak to it. And that particular clip with Thich Nhat Hanh, I think is the final piece. So I'm gonna end there, and Sanghamit is gonna play the gongs, take us into time of meditation, and we'll do the gongs, and let the ring of the gongs reverberate, and then I'll begin this guided meditation from Venerable Analayo. And it's pretty much based on this talk of his that I just made. And so it's very useful, and it's available if you just go to the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. Oh, yeah. Okay.
by taking a moment just to be with the presence of the body, being aware of the body in the sitting posture, and we let the mind rest in the body, just as the body rests on the cushion. And the continuity of this embodied presence of the mind can be with us throughout the entire meditation practice. But before getting into that, we can also take a moment to check in on the mind. Just as we took a moment to be with the body, we take a moment to be with the mind. What is the condition of the mind right now? And this investigation is based on mindfulness. And as mindfulness becomes established, more and more predominant, we discern the quality of our mind when mindfulness is present. Savoring, flavoring the texture of the mind, the characteristic quality of the mind when mindfulness is present. Could be soft and gentle, or maybe open, broad, or maybe alive, alert. Whatever qualities we can discern that help us familiarize ourselves with the condition of our mind when mindfulness is present. And for this practice, we can give particular importance to one dimension of mindfulness, which is monitoring. That ability to give us an overview of the situation, to be like a silent witness, almost like somebody looking over our shoulders. Even now, we can just listen to these words, or we can listen and know that we are listening. This knowing, this witnessing quality, this monitoring dimension of mindfulness, we can establish that and have that also as our companion during this meditation practice. Coming back to it again and again. And with this mindfulness rooted in bodily presence and this monitoring quality, we are ready for the body scan. Starting with the head, aware of the head and knowing there's some earth element. And from the head to the neck, earth element. And now we take both shoulders simultaneously. Aware of both shoulders, knowing that there is earth element. And from the shoulders to the upper arms, both upper arms simultaneously. Earth element. And the lower arms simultaneously. Earth element. And the hands. Earth element. Now we shift attention to the upper half of the torso, aware of earth element. And the lower half of the torso, earth element. Both hips simultaneously, earth element. The upper legs, both upper legs simultaneously, earth element. Both lower legs, earth element. And both feet, earth element. And we are aware of this whole body in the sitting posture as pervaded by the earth element. This principle, this quality of hardness, of solidity. And from the internal earth element, we proceed to the external earth element by sensing that hardness below us, where we are touching the ground, the cushion, the chair, whatever it is. Sensing the outer, the external earth element. Which supports us. And sensing this solidity below us, we also feel the gravity, the pull of gravity, and we relax into that pull of gravity. Let the whole body relax. Relaxing any tension, just letting it sink away into the ground. And feel how we are at one with the earth. And as we develop more familiarity with this kind of practice, familiarity with the internal and the external element, we find that this form of perception naturally continues with us beyond meditation sitting. It carries over into daily life. We walk or stand and we feel the earth beneath our feet. firmness, that solidity that supports us. At other times, we may notice that pull of gravity. In any situation, we can notice that as a reminder of our connection with the earth, and as a help to feel grounded, stable. This can be helpful, particularly in challenging situations. Just for a moment, sensing that gravity, coming back to our oneness with the earth, feeling supported by the earth, and we feel more grounded, able to deal with whatever challenge has presented itself from that place of groundedness. And together with that experience, perception, knowing of the earth element, also this monitoring quality can move into our daily life. That ability to oversee the situation, precisely based on this groundedness. Mindfulness can allow us to see things, observe them in a balanced manner, have an overview of the whole situation, seeing things in their perspective, in their interrelationship, through this monitoring ability, through this being conscious of what's going on, in particular what is going on in our own mind. But for now, returning to the sitting posture, aware of the body, its solidity, the gravity, the earth beneath us, arousing now the perception of the limitlessness of the earth, the understanding that this solidity which supports us reaches out far into the front, far away into the distance. The earth. And from the front, we keep moving gradually towards the right, in the direction towards the right of our body. Solidity, external earth element, far into the distance. And we keep moving from the right towards the back, towards the left, until we eventually complete the circle and are back in the front. And become aware of all directions. Of that extension of the earth in all directions. This gives us this perception of sitting on the planet Earth. Being one with it, supported by it. integral part of it. And we are not only integral part of the earth, supported by it, we are also in constant exchange, in a direct relationship with the earth, through the food we eat, drinking the water, the temperature, and the breathing. Breathing in the oxygen that has been produced by the plants that share the surface of the earth with us. And we become aware of the process of breathing. As an integral part of our whole body awareness, not as an exclusive focus. And we discern the difference between inhalation and exhalation. In the understanding that this continuous process, which keeps us alive, is a continuous exchange with the earth, with life on the earth. In the continuity of this whole body awareness, of its solidity seated on the earth, and the awareness of the process of breathing are very helpful to stabilize the mind. They support that we are able to avoid it becoming distracted, but nevertheless, sooner or later, mind is bound to wander off. That is just the nature of the mind. When we notice without a trace of aversion, negativity, frustration, smilingly, we notice, oh look, my mind has taken me for a ride. And then we discern if this was a short or a long distraction. A short distraction is somewhat like meeting somebody on the road, saying hello and moving on. But a long distraction is like meeting somebody on the road and then having a rather long conversation. Maybe even going somewhere, sitting down together. So if this was a short distraction, we just come back to the presence of the body, process of breathing. But if it was a longer distraction, then we investigate. We investigate, trying to understand the nature of this distraction, trying to see through train of thoughts and images and ideas, to discern the underlying current, the underlying condition of the mind. And for that discernment, feeling tone, Vedana, can be our help. In a way, we are already familiar with feeling tone. Feeling tone is that which feels the body when we scan, that which feels the breath. And the mind in turn is that which knows the body scan, the breath. Now we, looking back on that distraction, try to discern its feeling tone, its affective quality. Was it more pleasant? Or was it more unpleasant? Or was it kind of neutral, in between? An area where we cannot really say that was distinctly pleasant or distinctly unpleasant. And if we find that it was predominantly a pleasant feeling tone, this distraction, chances are that it was related to greed. And if it was more in the area of being unpleasant, chances are there was some aversion, anger. But if it was neither of the two, somewhat in the middle area of the spectrum of affective experience, chances are that was delusion. Of course, the other two are also manifestations of delusion. But for the purpose of the practice here, we use delusion more specifically for this ambling around of the mind, when it is neither in a mode of wanting, craving, wishing, greed, nor in the mode of irritation, anger, aversion, but just ambling around to no purpose. We use the label delusion for this type of distraction. This is our contemplation of the mind, coming to understand these three conditions: greed, anger, and delusion. And having recognized the quality, the underlying current that was present during this distraction, we also take a moment to compare this to the present condition of the mind, when, at least for a moment, greed, anger, and delusion do not manifest. Of course, their roots are still in the mind, but they do not manifest on the surface of the mind right now. And as we compare, we find that the present condition of the mind is so much more agreeable, so much more open, relaxed, receptive, alert. This makes it intuitively clear for us why it is preferable to have mental states not under the domination of these three root defilements, these three root poisons. We might even take a moment to rejoice. Just a moment to rejoice in the present condition of the mind. The mind that is open, relaxed, clear, alert, soft, gentle. And again, we discern the feeling tone. Very subtle, pleasant feeling. This is the subtle, pleasant feeling of being in the present moment. This is not related to greed. This is a wholesome, pleasant feeling. And this wholesome, pleasant feeling is something welcome, something that we can and should cultivate. Wholesome forms of joy and happiness are an integral part of the path to liberation. So that subtle, pleasant feeling of being in the present moment can be another companion in our meditation practice, rooted in whole body awareness, that monitoring quality through mindfulness, and that subtle, pleasant feeling of being in the present moment. These three in combination make it more easy for the mind to remain with the practice, make it more difficult for distractions to capture our attention and carry us away. And with the continuity of these three, we may decide whether we wish to maybe do another body scan. If it has been a rather long distraction, could be useful to just gradually build up the practice. Come back to this experience of whole body solidity, groundedness in the earth, gravity, expansion of the earth, until we get this feeling of being seated on the planet Earth, completely at one with it. But at other times, it may be that our investigation has already been sufficient activity. And if we were to get more active now, it would not be conducive to balance of the mind. Then we're just aware of whole body and the process of breathing, establishing that monitoring quality of mindfulness, maintaining it. And not missing out on this subtle joy of being in the present moment. Very subtle, very soft. And beings remain our connectedness with the earth and this quality of mindfulness that monitors throughout.
So we just have a couple minutes. That if anyone has any questions or comments. Before we close.
I just wanted to ask about, I sent cheated. Work that she's doing with activism with the environment. Is that, and then I guess, in Massachusetts, but are there active movements you can get involved with?
There are many lay-led groups. The Extinction Rebellion is a very powerful group. Ayya Ahimsa is mostly what she's done is create a sacred space. And she has a group online on Wednesday morning, and it's called the Loka Earth Room. If it's of interest to people. And her intention is to have a sacred space where people can not be overwhelmed and not be shutting down, but actually trying to digest conditions that we're living in currently. Yes, Roddy.
I have maybe where define this a little bit for myself. When you're talking about greed, hate, and delusion arising from ignorance, and delusion being ignorance, so it's sort of a separate thing. You know, they're doing it, and therefore, yeah, whatever. I'm just one person. This is the concept. Is apathy different than that, or is that sort of?
No, I think
Same.
resignation, apathy, I think they're
Same.
very similar. Yeah, and that it's very overwhelming, so it's very easy to shut down. And sometimes when we're getting overwhelmed, it might be, or we're getting agitated, then we want to be aware of our own capacity and not overwhelm it. And sometimes reading too much news and looking at the state of the world sometimes can be beyond our own capacity. I think we need to do it. Titration. If people are familiar with this word, titration. It's a word from science, from chemistry, but it's used a lot with trauma and trying to digest trauma. You don't want to re-traumatize. So titration is what happens when you have two volatile solutions and you're trying to combine them. If you pour them together, it explode. But if you titrate it drop by drop, then you can often bring two volatile things together. And sometimes with climate change, I often think about titration. Otherwise, it's overwhelming.
Feel like there's, from my experience anyway, there's a fine line between even all of these things, apathy and greed and like some fear, and how they're all, it's like a kind of a really thin line. I can jump between those all different times, or delusion as you sort of described it, or apathy, and then some greed in there too, right? But then also some fear to make sure you're okay. You're going to be okay, which is a bit of a pitting against others who maybe aren't okay. It's very I don't know, almost like fluid emotions that I can see aren't the best.
Yeah, I think I remember, like living in California and being in this fire zones, and just climate change was so. I mean, you could feel it get hotter every year. and I can remember feeling very overwhelmed at one point, and then this one morning I woke up, and it was just, you just need to be a good person. Like, I realized that I had a lot of scenarios of, because, I mean, our neighbor had this sign on their gate: do you speak English, or do I need to speak 12 gauge? It was sort of the neighbor, this rural Trump land that we lived in. And yeah, so I had visions of, at one point we're trying to figure out, make a garden and grow our own food, and how do you eat acorns, and all these yes, scenarios in my mind. We had some food and people were coming and they're gonna shoot us for it, and I just started to realize, and these things are coming. They very well, probably are coming. But honestly, our own hearts and minds are the most important. They really are, and I don't want to shoot someone so that I can live another day eating. I just more and more want to work with that in my own heart and mind. And it's easier for me when I'm older, I'm not 30. So painful to talk to about some of these things with my daughter, it's just super tough. Yeah. But we can bring mindfulness to it. This we can do. Yeah. We're almost out of time. So okay. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment with regards to whether one person can make a difference. I have a fridge magnet by the Dalai Lama that says, if you think that one person can't make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito.
There's that wonderful Margaret Mead quote, right? Something like, do people know it? Don't something like, don't doubt whether a few committed people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever happens. Yeah. Okay. Let's end there. Yeah.
May you be well, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be loving, may you be calm, may you be safe. May no problems come to you, may no difficulties come to you, may no harm come to you, may you meet with spiritual success. May you have the patience, the strength, the courage, the determination, the inner clarity, and the wisdom to meet and overcome the inevitable problems in life, to meet and overcome the inevitable difficulties in life, to meet and overcome the inevitable frustrations in life, and to meet and overcome the inevitable failures in life. May the whole of our hearts be filled with loving friendliness. May every cell of our bodies be filled with loving friendliness. May we build a healthy, happy aura of loving friendliness all around us, through which no evil thought, word, or intention, or any form of harm may penetrate, but from its loving friendliness may radiate in all directions, and may we be protected. May the merit of our practice be shared with all sentient beings, named and unnamed. May all beings be well and happy.